Picture this, a winter so brutal that the mighty Rhine River, Europe's great liquid barrier between civilization and barbarian lands, froze solid enough for 80,000 people to walk across its surface with wagons, livestock, and everything they owned. On December the 31st, 406 AD, the Burgundians, along with their Vandal and Alan allies, crossed that frozen river and changed European history forever. But this dramatic moment was just one chapter in an epic story that began centuries earlier in the misty forests of northern Poland, where a Germanic tribe would rise from obscurity to create kingdoms, legal codes, cultural achievements that shaped medieval Europe. Who were these people, and how did they transform from forest-dwelling warriors into sophisticated rulers whose legacy still influences us today? The Burgundians emerged from the dense forests and marshy lands along the Vistula River system during the first 2 centuries AD, their earliest settlements clustering along meandering riverbanks in what is now northern Poland and the southern Baltic coast. Archaeological excavations throughout the 20th and 21st centuries have revealed a distinctive material culture that sets the early Burgundians apart from their Germanic neighbours, particularly through their sophisticated metalworking techniques and elaborate burial practices. The wheelbark culture, which dominated this region from approximately 1 AD to 450 AD, provides our clearest archaeological window into early Burgundian society, with excavations at sites like Kowalewko and Grzybowo uncovering substantial evidence of remarkable craftsmanship. Think about what this means. While Rome was building its empire, these Germanic people in the far north were developing their own sophisticated civilization. The archaeological record reveals a people skilled in iron production, with furnaces capable of reaching temperatures sufficient for creating high-quality steel weapons that could slice through lesser blades like butter. Their fibulae, elaborate brooches used to fasten clothing, were characterized by intricate spiral designs and animal motifs that demonstrate sophisticated metalwork techniques far beyond simple functionality. Unlike the simpler geometric patterns favored by many contemporary Germanic tribes, Burgundian artisans incorporated complex zoomorphic elements that suggest both artistic sophistication and specific religious symbolism. As these weren't primitive barbarians, these were skilled craftsmen whose work would influence European metalworking for centuries. The settlement patterns evident from archaeological surveys reveal strategic thinking that would serve the Burgundians well in their later migrations and kingdom building. Early Burgundian communities favored elevated positions near river confluences, providing both defensive advantages against potential enemies and access to trade routes that connected them to the wider Germanic and Roman worlds. These settlements typically consisted of rectangular longhouses constructed with timber frames and wattle and daub walls, each capable of housing extended family groups of 15 to 20 individuals, entire clans living under one roof, sharing warmth, food, and stories during the long Baltic winters. Here's what's truly fascinating. The presence of specialized craft workshops within these settlements, identified through concentrations of metalworking debris and partially finished artifacts, suggests a degree of economic specialization unusual among contemporary Germanic tribes. This wasn't just subsistence living. This was an economy sophisticated enough to support full-time craftsmen who didn't need to farm for their own food. Burial practices provide particularly rich insights into early Burgundian society and belief systems, revealing a warrior culture that placed tremendous emphasis on martial prowess and individual achievement. Male burials frequently contain elaborate weapon sets, including pattern-welded swords, whose complex construction techniques created blades of exceptional strength and flexibility, often decorated with intricate designs that held both aesthetic and spiritual significance. The quality and quantity of grave goods vary significantly between burials, indicating a stratified society where military leaders and successful warriors accumulated considerable wealth and prestige, a social hierarchy based not just on birth, but on proven valor in battle. Women's burials from this period reveal their own forms of social stratification, with elite females interred alongside intricate jewelry, amber beads imported from Baltic shores, and textile implements that suggest their role in high-status craft production. The presence of Roman coins and imported glass vessels in some female graves indicates that Burgundian women participated in long-distance trade networks and held significant economic authority within their communities. These weren't passive bystanders, but active participants in their society's economic and cultural life. The linguistic evidence for early Burgundian language presents a complex picture that scholars have painstakingly reconstructed through comparative analysis with related East Germanic dialects. Burgundian belonged to the East Germanic branch of the Germanic language family, sharing significant features with Gothic and Vandalic while maintaining distinctive characteristics that set it apart from West and North Germanic languages. Analysis of Burgundian personal names recorded in later historical sources reveals distinctive linguistic patterns. Names like Gundobad, Gislahari, and Godomar demonstrate the characteristic East Germanic treatment of certain consonant clusters and vowel systems that differentiated Burgundian from contemporary dialects. The warrior culture that dominated early Burgundian society centered around concepts of personal honor, martial prowess, and loyalty to charismatic leaders that would shape their destiny for centuries. Young men underwent initiation ceremonies that marked their transition from childhood to warrior status, receiving their first weapons in rituals that archaeological evidence suggests involved elaborate feasting and gift-giving ceremonies. The comitatus system, whereby young warriors attached themselves to successful leaders in exchange for weapons, protection, and opportunities for glory, provided the organizational framework that enabled Burgundian military effectiveness and social cohesion. This wasn't just about fighting, it was about belonging to something greater than oneself. Archaeological evidence from weapon burials reveals the sophisticated military technology that supported Burgundian warrior culture. Their smiths produced pattern-welded swords whose complex construction techniques created blades that were both incredibly strong and flexible. Imagine a blade that could bend nearly double without breaking, then spring back to perfect straightness. The presence of specialized arrowheads designed for different tactical purposes, from broad hunting points to narrow armor-piercing designs, indicates a military culture that had developed sophisticated approaches to both individual combat and coordinated battlefield tactics. But storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, pressures that would force these forest warriors to abandon their ancestral homeland forever. During the late 2nd and early 3rd centuries, the relatively stable world of the early Burgundians began to experience pressures that would ultimately force them to abandon their ancestral territories along the Vistula. The expansion of Hunnic power from the eastern steppes created a domino effect of tribal migrations that disrupted the established balance of power throughout the Germanic world. While the Huns themselves didn't initially penetrate as far west as Burgundian territories, their pressure on Gothic and other East Germanic tribes created a cascade of displacement that gradually affected all the peoples of the region. Imagine falling dominoes, each tribe pushing the next westward in a desperate search for safety and new lands. Climate changes during this period compounded the political pressures facing Burgundian communities. Paleoclimatic evidence suggests that the 3rd century witnessed a period of cooling temperatures and increased precipitation that made traditional agricultural practices more difficult and reduced the carrying capacity of the land. Archaeological evidence from Burgundian settlements shows signs of increasing stress during this period. Smaller house sizes, reduced craft production, and changes in burial practices that suggest communities under pressure. When your crops fail and your neighbors are fleeing westward from terrifying horse-mounted warriors, What choice do you have but to move? The combination of external military threats and environmental challenges created conditions that made westward migration increasingly attractive to Burgundian leaders. Roman sources begin to mention Burgundian groups along the Rhine frontier during the mid-3rd century, suggesting that the migration process had begun by this time. The decision to abandon ancestral territories represented a fundamental transformation in Burgundian society, requiring new forms of organization and leadership capable of managing the complex logistics of moving entire communities, men, women, children, elderly, livestock, and all their possessions across hundreds of miles of contested territory. The archaeological record from the latest phases of Burgundian occupation along the Vistula reveals a society in transition, with evidence of increased weapon production, changes in settlement patterns that suggest preparation for mobility, and the appearance of new burial practices that may reflect the spiritual preparations necessary for such a momentous undertaking. The transformation of Burgundian society from settled communities along the Vistula to mobile warrior bands capable of crossing the Rhine represented one of the most dramatic demographic shifts in late antiquity. By the closing decades of the 4th century, Burgundian tribal confederations had completed their westward journey across the North European plain, establishing temporary settlements along the middle Rhine valley while maintaining the military organization necessary for continued expansion. Archaeological evidence from sites like Mainz and Speyer reveals the presence of distinctively Burgundian metalwork and burial practices dating to this transitional period, indicating that substantial populations had successfully navigated the complex political landscape of the Roman frontier zone. The winter of 406 AD marked a pivotal moment in European history. Contemporary sources, particularly the chronicler Prosper of Aquitaine, described the river as frozen so thoroughly that armed warriors could march across its surface without breaking through the ice, a phenomenon so rare that it suggested divine intervention to those who witnessed it. The Burgundians, along with their Vandal and Alan allies, had spent months preparing for this crossing, accumulating supplies and coordinating their movements to maximize their chances of overwhelming Roman frontier defenses through sheer numbers and coordinated timing. This wasn't a panicked flight, this was a planned invasion on a massive scale. The crossing itself involved approximately 80,000 Burgundians organized into family groups led by their traditional war leaders, each group responsible for transporting their own weapons, tools, and essential supplies across the treacherous river surface. Think about that number for a moment. 80,000 people, roughly the population of a modern city, walking across a frozen river in the dead of winter, knowing that if the ice broke, they would die in minutes in the freezing water below. Archaeological analysis of abandoned campsites along the eastern Rhine bank reveals the scale of preparation involved, with evidence of massive stockpiles of preserved food, temporary forge installations for last-minute weapon repairs, and burial sites containing individuals who died during the harsh winter months preceding the crossing. The material remains suggest a highly organized operation rather than a desperate flight, with tribal leaders coordinating logistics on a scale that required sophisticated planning and communication networks. The initial Roman response to this massive incursion proved inadequate to contain the scale of the invasion. The Rhine frontier, already weakened by decades of troop withdrawals to support imperial campaigns in other theatres, could not muster sufficient forces to prevent the crossing or contain the subsequent dispersal of tribal groups throughout Gaul. Stilicho, the powerful magister militum, who effectively controlled the Western Roman Empire during Emperor Honorius's minority, found himself confronting a crisis that threatened to destabilize the entire Gallic prefecture, while simultaneously managing Gothic pressures in Italy and usurpation attempts in Britain. It was like trying to put out 3 fires at once with a single bucket of water. The Burgundians demonstrated remarkable tactical flexibility during their initial campaigns in Gaul, avoiding direct confrontations with major Roman field armies while systematically occupying strategic positions that controlled river crossings and trade routes. Unlike the Vandals, who pursued a strategy of rapid movement toward the Mediterranean coast, or the Alans, who scattered into smaller raiding bands, the Burgundians maintained their tribal cohesion while establishing fortified positions that could serve as bases for further expansion or negotiation with Roman authorities. Their choice of targets revealed sophisticated intelligence gathering. They consistently occupied sites with existing infrastructure suitable for supporting large populations, while avoiding heavily defended urban centers that would require costly siege operations. But here's where things get interesting. The transformation of these initial military successes into a recognized political entity required delicate negotiations with Roman imperial authorities, who faced the practical reality of their inability to expel the invaders through military force alone. The concept of foederati status, whereby barbarian tribes received official recognition as allied troops in exchange for military service and territorial grants, provided a framework that served both Roman administrative needs and Burgundian desires for legitimacy. Emperor Honorius, advised by court officials who understood the strategic value of converting enemies into allies, authorized negotiations that would fundamentally alter the political landscape of Eastern Gaul. Sometimes the best way to defeat your enemy is to make them your friend. The establishment of the first Burgundian kingdom around Worms in 413 AD represented a remarkable achievement in early medieval state-building, creating a functioning political entity that combined Germanic tribal traditions with Roman administrative practices. The choice of Worms as their capital demonstrated strategic thinking. The city controlled important Rhine crossings while possessing existing urban infrastructure capable of supporting a royal court and administrative apparatus. Archaeological excavations in the Worms area have revealed evidence of substantial Burgundian settlement during this period, including distinctive grave goods, modified Roman buildings adapted for Germanic use, and workshop areas producing the characteristic metalwork that marked Burgundian material culture. King Gundobad's court at Worms developed into a sophisticated political centre that attracted not only Burgundian nobles, but also Roman administrators, merchants, and clerics who recognized the opportunities presented by this new political arrangement. The royal household maintained Germanic traditions of warrior loyalty and gift-giving while adopting Roman practices of written record-keeping and formal diplomatic protocol. Contemporary sources describe elaborate feasting ceremonies where Burgundian nobles received weapons and jewelry from their king, while Roman officials participated in negotiations conducted according to imperial legal procedures. A fascinating blend of two completely different political cultures finding ways to work together. The integration of Burgundian settlers with existing Gallo-Roman populations proceeded through a complex process of accommodation and adaptation that varied significantly across different regions and social levels. In rural areas, Burgundian warriors often received grants of land that had been abandoned or confiscated from Roman owners who had fled during the initial invasion, while in some cases they established new settlements on previously uncultivated territories. The archaeological record reveals evidence of both segregated communities where Burgundians maintained their traditional settlement patterns and mixed communities where Germanic and Roman material cultures began to blend, like oil and water, slowly mixing into an emulsion that would eventually become something entirely new. The prosperity of the Worms kingdom during its early decades attracted additional Germanic settlers and refugees from other tribal groups displaced by continuing migrations and conflicts. This population growth strengthened Burgundian military capabilities while creating new challenges for resource management and internal governance. Archaeological surveys reveal evidence of expanding settlement areas and increased agricultural production during this period, suggesting successful adaptation to their new territorial base and growing economic prosperity. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed the Burgundians had found their promised land, a place where they could finally settle down and build a lasting kingdom, but the very success of the Burgundian kingdom created conditions that would ultimately lead to its destruction. The growing power and prosperity of Gundobad's realm attracted the attention of Attila the Hun, whose expanding empire sought to eliminate potential rivals while extracting tribute from settled populations. The Huns' demand for submission and tribute payments conflicted fundamentally with Burgundian concepts of royal honor and tribal independence, creating an irreconcilable conflict that neither diplomatic negotiation nor military deterrence could resolve. Here's the cruel irony. The Burgundians had fled their Baltic homeland partly to escape the pressure of Hunnic expansion, only to find that pressure following them westward like a pursuing wolf. The catastrophic destruction of the Burgundian kingdom at Worms in 436 AD left the surviving population scattered across Gaul, their political unity shattered and their military strength decimated. Contemporary sources, including the chronicler Hydatius and later Gallic annals, describe the aftermath as a humanitarian crisis of unprecedented scale, with refugee columns stretching for miles along Roman roads as displaced Burgundians sought shelter and sustenance wherever they could find it. The survivors faced not only the immediate challenges of finding food and shelter, but also the complex task of maintaining their cultural identity and social structures without the institutional framework of their former kingdom. Imagine losing everything: your home, your king, half your people, and having to rebuild from scratch in a strange land, yet that's exactly what the Burgundians would do. The Roman response to this crisis reflected both pragmatic administrative concerns and genuine humanitarian considerations. Emperor Valentinian III, ruling from Ravenna under the guidance of his mother Galla Placidia and the powerful general Aetius, recognized that the displaced Burgundians represented both a potential security threat and a valuable military resource if properly managed. The imperial administration had learned from previous experiences with barbarian settlements that successful integration required careful planning, adequate resources, and clear legal frameworks that could accommodate Germanic social structures within Roman provincial administration. Aetius, whose military genius had already demonstrated itself in campaigns against various barbarian groups and usurpers, understood that the Burgundian survivors possessed military skills and organizational capabilities that could serve imperial interests if channeled effectively. His previous interactions with Germanic tribes had taught him that successful foederati arrangements required respecting tribal leadership structures while establishing clear obligations and territorial boundaries. The general strategic vision encompassed not merely the immediate problem of refugee resettlement, but the longer-term goal of creating a stable buffer zone against further barbarian incursions from across the Rhine, turning a problem into a solution. The selection of Sapordia as the destination for Burgundian resettlement demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both geographic and political factors that would influence the success of this ambitious undertaking. The region, encompassing much of modern Savoy and extending into adjacent areas of what would become Switzerland and southeastern France, offered several crucial advantages for establishing a new Burgundian homeland. The mountainous terrain provided natural defensive barriers that would make the territory easier to defend against external threats, while the fertile valleys contained sufficient agricultural land to support substantial populations. Archaeological surveys conducted throughout the Sapordia region have revealed evidence of existing Gallo-Roman settlements and villa complexes that could provide immediate shelter and infrastructure for incoming Burgundian families. The actual process of resettlement, beginning around 443 AD, involved complex logistical operations that required coordination between Roman provincial administrators, Burgundian tribal leaders, and local Gallo-Roman communities. Imperial officials conducted detailed surveys of available land, assessing both the carrying capacity of different areas and the existing population densities that would affect integration prospects. Burgundian leaders, meanwhile, worked to maintain clan and family groupings during the relocation process, recognizing that preserving these traditional social bonds would be crucial for maintaining cultural continuity in their new homeland. You can't just scatter people randomly and expect them to maintain their identity. The legal framework governing this resettlement drew upon established Roman precedents for barbarian foederati, while incorporating specific provisions designed to address the unique circumstances of the Burgundian situation. The hospitalitas system, whereby barbarian settlers received grants of land and resources in exchange for military service obligations, provided the basic structure for these arrangements. However, the Burgundian settlement required modifications to accommodate their larger numbers and more complex social organization compared to previous foederati groups. Under these arrangements, Burgundian nobles received substantial land grants that enabled them to maintain their traditional roles as leaders of warrior bands, while accepting overall Roman administrative authority. King Gundioch emerged as the dominant Burgundian leader during this crucial period of resettlement and reorganization, his authority recognized both by his own people and by Roman imperial administrators who needed reliable partners for managing the complex challenges of integration. Contemporary sources describe Gundioch as a skilled diplomat who could navigate both Germanic concepts of personal honor and Roman legal procedures, making him an ideal intermediary for the delicate negotiations required to establish stable relationships between different communities within Sapordia. His consolidation of power among the scattered Burgundian groups required careful attention to traditional legitimacy sources while adapting to the new political realities of life within the Roman provincial system, walking a tightrope between two worlds. The expansion of Burgundian territory under Gundioch's leadership proceeded through a combination of diplomatic negotiation, military pressure, and strategic alliance building that gradually extended their influence throughout the Rhone Valley system. This expansion wasn't merely territorial acquisition, but represented a systematic effort to create defensible boundaries and secure control over economically valuable resources. The Rhone River system provided crucial transportation routes that connected Mediterranean markets with northern European trade networks, while the surrounding agricultural lands offered the productive capacity necessary to support growing populations, control the rivers, control the wealth. The development of Burgundian legal systems during this period represented one of the most significant achievements of early medieval jurisprudence, creating comprehensive legal codes that successfully integrated Germanic customary law with Roman legal principles. This synthesis wasn't merely theoretical but addressed practical needs arising from the governance of mixed populations with different legal traditions and cultural expectations. The Burgundian legal system had to accommodate disputes between Germanic warriors and Roman citizens, regulate economic relationships between different communities, and establish procedures for criminal justice that both groups would accept as legitimate. The Lex Burgundionum, though compiled in its surviving form during later periods, reflects legal developments that began during Gundioch's reign as Burgundian administrators worked to create coherent legal frameworks for their expanding territories. The code's provisions reveal sophisticated understanding of both Germanic concepts of personal honor and Roman principles of written law, creating hybrid legal procedures that could address the complex disputes arising in multicultural societies. The emphasis on compensation payments rather than physical punishment reflected Germanic legal traditions, while the detailed procedural requirements demonstrated Roman influence on legal administration. Think about how revolutionary this was, creating a legal system that could satisfy two completely different cultural traditions simultaneously. The death of Gundioch around 473 AD precipitated a succession crisis that would fundamentally reshape Burgundian political structures and establish the framework for the kingdom's most sophisticated period of legal and administrative development. Unlike the clear hereditary succession patterns that characterize many Germanic kingdoms, Burgundian tradition recognized multiple claimants among a deceased king's male relatives, creating opportunities for both internal conflict and innovative power-sharing arrangements. Gundobad, one of Gundiok's sons, emerged from this complex succession process not merely as king of the Burgundians, but as a figure who would successfully navigate the intricate political landscape of late 5th century Gaul while maintaining simultaneous positions within both Germanic and Roman power structures. Here's where things get really interesting. Gundobad's rise to dominance required eliminating potential rivals among his own family members, a process that contemporary sources describe with the brutal efficiency characteristic of Germanic succession struggles. His brother Chilperic, who had established his own power base around Lyon, represented the most serious threat to unified Burgundian authority. The conflict between these brothers extended beyond mere personal ambition to encompass fundamental questions about the future direction of Burgundian political development, with Chilperic advocating closer integration with Roman administrative systems, while Gundobad favored maintaining stronger Germanic institutional traditions. The resolution of this fraternal conflict through Chilperic's assassination around 493 AD eliminated the last significant internal challenge to Gundobad's authority, while simultaneously demonstrating the ruthless pragmatism that would characterize his approach to political problems throughout his reign. Archaeological evidence from Lyon reveals signs of violent destruction at several elite residences during this period, suggesting that the elimination of Chilperic involved systematic purges of his supporters and the redistribution of their properties among Gundobad's followers. But from this violence emerged one of the most sophisticated legal systems of the early medieval period. Sometimes great achievements require terrible sacrifices. The unique aspect of Gundobad's political position lay in his simultaneous holding of both Germanic kingship and Roman imperial office, a dual role that required constant negotiation between competing sets of obligations and expectations. His appointment as Magister Militum per Gallius by Emperor Zeno in 474 AD recognized both his military capabilities and his strategic importance in maintaining Roman interests in southeastern Gaul. This position granted him command authority over imperial forces throughout the Gallic provinces, while requiring him to coordinate his policies with other Roman officials and maintain loyalty to imperial objectives that might conflict with purely Burgundian interests. Practical challenges of managing these dual roles required sophisticated administrative systems capable of distinguishing between Gundobad's actions as Germanic king and his responsibilities as Roman general. His court developed elaborate protocols for conducting business in different capacities, with separate ceremonial procedures for receiving Germanic nobles seeking royal favor and Roman officials requiring military coordination. Archaeological evidence from his primary residence at Lyon reveals architectural modifications that created distinct spaces for Germanic and Roman court functions, including a traditional Germanic hall for warrior assemblies alongside Roman-style administrative offices equipped for managing imperial correspondence and military logistics. So the promulgation of the Lex Burgundionum around 500 AD represented the culmination of decades of legal development and administrative experimentation, creating one of the most sophisticated legal codes of the early medieval period. This comprehensive legal system addressed the practical challenges of governing mixed populations with different cultural traditions, while establishing clear procedural frameworks that could accommodate both Germanic customary law and Roman legal principles. The code's development required extensive consultation with both Germanic legal experts who understood traditional tribal customs and Roman jurists familiar with imperial legal procedures. Imagine trying to create a constitution that satisfies both American and Chinese legal traditions simultaneously. and you'll get some sense of the challenge. The structure of the Lexi Burgundionum reveals careful attention to the hierarchical organization of Burgundian society, while incorporating Roman concepts of written law and procedural regularity. The code established clear distinctions between different social classes, with separate legal provisions governing the rights and obligations of Burgundian nobles, free warriors, and various categories of dependents. These social distinctions reflected traditional Germanic concepts of honor and status while incorporating Roman legal categories that could accommodate the complex social relationships that had developed in mixed communities, a legal framework sophisticated enough to handle disputes between a Burgundian warrior and a Roman wine merchant. Property law within the Lex Burgundionum addressed the fundamental challenges of regulating land tenure in societies where Germanic collective ownership concepts coexisted with Roman individual property rights. The code established innovative legal mechanisms for transferring property between different ethnic groups while protecting the essential interests of both Germanic clans and Roman proprietors. Archaeological evidence from rural settlements reveals the practical implementation of these legal principles, with land use patterns that reflect successful integration of different ownership concepts while maintaining productive agricultural systems. Creation of the Lex Romana Burgundionum as a separate legal code specifically governing Roman subjects within Burgundian territories demonstrated Gundobad's sophisticated understanding of the administrative challenges involved in ruling mixed populations. Rather than attempting to force all inhabitants under a single legal system, this approach recognized that different communities required different legal frameworks while maintaining overall political unity under Burgundian royal authority. The Roman code drew primarily upon the Theodosian Code and other established imperial legal sources, while incorporating specific modifications necessary for local conditions, pragmatism over ideology, results over theory. Religious policy under Gundobad required equally careful balancing between the Arian Christianity that had become dominant among Burgundian elites and the Catholic Christianity practiced by the majority of Gallo-Roman subjects. Gundobad's own conversion to Arian Christianity, probably occurring during his early career as a military leader, reflected both personal conviction and political calculation, as Arianism had become associated with Germanic royal authority throughout much of post-Roman Europe. However, his marriage to a Catholic wife and his tolerant policies toward Catholic clergy demonstrated his understanding that successful governance required accommodation of different religious traditions. You can't force everyone to believe the same thing, especially when they outnumber you. The theological differences between Arian and Catholic Christianity, centering primarily on the nature of Christ's relationship to God the Father, had become deeply intertwined with ethnic and political identities throughout the former Roman Empire. Arian Christianity, with its emphasis on the subordination of the Son to the Father, appealed to Germanic concepts of hierarchical authority, while Catholic Trinitarian theology resonated with Roman intellectual traditions and established ecclesiastical structures. Gundobad's religious policies had to navigate these theological distinctions while preventing religious differences from undermining political stability. Archaeological evidence from religious sites throughout Burgundian territories reveals the coexistence of Arian and Catholic worship facilities, often within remarkably close geographic proximity. Excavations at sites like Vienne have uncovered both Arian churches built according to Germanic architectural traditions and Catholic basilicas following Roman ecclesiastical designs. The material remains suggest that these different religious communities maintained distinct liturgical practices and theological orientations while participating in shared economic and political structures. But storm clouds were gathering. Religious differences that seemed manageable under wise rulers like Gundobad would eventually become weapons in the hands of their enemies. The conversion of King Sigismund to Catholic Christianity around 516 AD marked a decisive turning point in Burgundian religious development, representing not merely personal theological conviction, but calculated political strategy designed to strengthen the kingdom's position in an increasingly Catholic European diplomatic environment. Sigismund's decision to abandon the Arian faith of his father Gundobad required careful management to avoid alienating traditional Burgundian supporters while signalling his commitment to Catholic orthodoxy to neighboring rulers and potential allies. Contemporary sources describe elaborate conversion ceremonies that combine traditional Germanic concepts of royal authority with Catholic sacramental theology, creating hybrid religious rituals that could satisfy both cultural traditions. Sigismund's promotion of Catholic monasticism represented a particularly sophisticated approach to religious transformation that addressed both spiritual and political objectives simultaneously. Monastic communities provided institutional frameworks for preserving and transmitting Catholic theological traditions while serving practical functions as centers of learning, agricultural innovation, and diplomatic communication. The king's patronage of monastic establishments demonstrated his commitment to Catholic orthodoxy while creating religious institutions that could contribute to the kingdom's economic and cultural development. Monasteries were like medieval universities, research centers, and diplomatic embassies, all rolled into one. The Abbey of Saint-Maurice, established through Sigismund's direct patronage around 515 AD, exemplified the successful integration of Catholic monastic traditions with Burgundian royal authority and Germanic cultural values. The abbey's location in the strategically important Rhone Valley provided both defensive advantages and access to major transportation routes, while its dedication to St. Maurice, a Roman soldier martyred for his Christian faith, created symbolic connections between military valor and religious devotion that resonated with Germanic warrior culture. Archaeological excavations at the abbey site have revealed substantial royal investments in monastic infrastructure, including elaborate church buildings, residential quarters for monks, and workshop facilities for manuscript production and craft activities. This wasn't just a church, this was a statement of cultural power. The death of Gundobad in 516 AD marked the beginning of a succession crisis that would expose the fundamental structural weaknesses underlying Burgundian royal authority, setting in motion a series of dynastic conflicts that ultimately made the kingdom vulnerable to Frankish conquest. Sigismund's accession to the throne, while initially appearing to strengthen the kingdom through his Catholic conversion and diplomatic initiatives, actually created new sources of internal tension as traditional Burgundian nobles questioned the legitimacy of a ruler who had abandoned the Arian faith that had become closely associated with Germanic royal identity. The most serious challenge to Sigismund's authority emerged from his own family, as his brother Godemar III maintained control over substantial territories around Geneva, while refusing to acknowledge the new king's supremacy or accept his religious policies. Godemar's position represented more than simple fraternal rivalry. It embodied a fundamental disagreement about the future direction of Burgundian political development, with the younger brother advocating for the preservation of traditional Germanic institutions and religious practices that had sustained Burgundian independence since their settlement in Sapordia. Archaeological evidence from Geneva during this period reveals extensive fortification work and the accumulation of military supplies, suggesting systematic preparation for armed resistance against royal authority. The division of the kingdom between these competing brothers created parallel administrative systems that undermined the unified governance structures that Gundobad had carefully constructed during his long reign. Sigismund controlled the southern territories centered around Lyon and Vienne, where his Catholic conversion had found more acceptance among the substantial Gallo-Roman populations, while Godemar commanded the loyalty of northern regions where traditional Burgundian warrior culture remained strongest. This geographic division roughly corresponded to religious and cultural boundaries that had persisted despite decades of attempted integration, revealing the superficial nature of the cultural synthesis that had characterized the kingdom's apparent prosperity. The cracks in the kingdom's foundation were showing, and the Franks were watching carefully. The Frankish rulers, Childebert and Clothar, that recognized the strategic opportunities presented by Burgundian internal divisions, understanding that a divided kingdom could not effectively resist coordinated external pressure, while its internal conflicts provided potential allies among disaffected Burgundian nobles. Their systematic preparation for conquest involved not merely military planning, but sophisticated intelligence gathering and diplomatic maneuvering designed to maximize Burgundian internal divisions while minimizing the risks of unified resistance. Archaeological evidence from Frankish territories reveals substantial military preparations during the early 520s, including the expansion of weapon production facilities and the construction of supply depots along routes leading toward Burgundian territories. The first phase of Frankish operations against the Burgundians began in 523 AD with carefully coordinated raids against border territories that tested Burgundian defensive responses, while avoiding commitments to major battles that might unite the divided kingdom against a common enemy. These initial attacks targeted isolated settlements and transportation routes rather than major fortified positions, creating economic disruption and psychological pressure, while gathering intelligence about Burgundian military capabilities and defensive preparations. Archaeological evidence from border regions reveals extensive damage to civilian settlements during this period, suggesting systematic campaigns designed to undermine economic foundations rather than achieve immediate territorial conquest. Childebert's invasion of northern Burgundian territories proceeded through methodical siege operations that demonstrated Frankish mastery of Roman military engineering techniques while exploiting the defensive weaknesses created by Burgundian internal divisions. The Siege of Geneva in 524 AD exemplified this approach, with Frankish forces employing sophisticated siege equipment, including battering rams, siege towers, and catapults, that overwhelmed defenders who had expected to face traditional Germanic assault tactics. Contemporary accounts describe the systematic destruction of Geneva's fortifications and the massacre of its garrison, events that demonstrated Frankish determination to eliminate Burgundian resistance through exemplary violence rather than negotiated settlement. The message was clear: submit or die, and city by city, fortress by fortress, the Burgundian kingdom was falling. The Siege of Lyon in 532 AD represented the climactic confrontation between Frankish expansion and Burgundian resistance, with both sides recognizing that control of this strategically crucial city would determine the ultimate fate of the kingdom. Lyon's position at the confluence of the Rhone and Saône rivers made it the natural center of southeastern Gallic trade networks, while its substantial fortifications and loyal garrison made it the strongest remaining Burgundian defensive position. Chlothar's decision to conduct the siege personally demonstrated the importance he attached to capturing the city, while Sigismund's desperate attempts to organize relief forces revealed his understanding that Lyon's fall would effectively end Burgundian independence. The Frankish siege of Lyon employed the full range of military technologies and tactics that had proven successful in previous campaigns, with massive siege engines systematically destroying the city's defensive walls, while coordinated assaults prevented the garrison from conducting effective repairs or counterattacks. Archaeological evidence from Lyon reveals extensive destruction throughout the city during this period, with burned buildings, collapsed fortifications, and scattered military equipment that testify to the intensity of the fighting. The discovery of multiple mass burial sites suggests that both civilian and military casualties were substantial, indicating that the siege involved not merely military conquest, but systematic destruction of the city's ability to serve as a center of continued resistance. The psychological impact of Lyon's fall extended far beyond its immediate military significance to encompass the collapse of Burgundian morale and political cohesion throughout the kingdom. Contemporary sources describe widespread panic among Burgundian nobles as news of the city's capture spread, with many choosing to abandon their territories and seek refuge in neighbouring kingdoms rather than continue hopeless resistance against Frankish forces. The archaeological record reveals evidence of hasty abandonment at numerous elite residential sites during this period, with valuable objects left behind and buildings showing signs of rapid evacuation rather than systematic demolition. An entire civilization was dissolving before the Frankish onslaught, but the story of the Burgundians was far from over. The siege and capture of Vienne in 534 AD completed the systematic destruction of Burgundian defensive capabilities, eliminating the last major stronghold capable of serving as a centre for organised resistance against Frankish rule. Vienne's strategic position, controlling access to the upper Rhine valley, had made it a crucial component of Burgundian defensive planning, while its role as an ecclesiastical centre had given it symbolic importance that extended beyond purely military considerations. The foederati's fall marked not merely the end of Burgundian military resistance, but the collapse of the institutional frameworks that had sustained Burgundian political and cultural identity for over a century. The Frankish conquest of Vienne involved not only military operations but systematic efforts to eliminate the administrative and religious institutions that had supported Burgundian independence. Archaeological evidence reveals the deliberate destruction of royal administrative buildings and the confiscation of ecclesiastical properties that had served as centres of Burgundian cultural life. And the discovery of damaged religious artifacts and scattered administrative documents suggests that Frankish forces pursued policies designed to prevent any future revival of Burgundian political organisation rather than simply achieving military victory. This wasn't just conquest, this was cultural annihilation. The integration of conquered Burgundian territories into the expanding Frankish Merovingian kingdom required complex administrative arrangements that could accommodate the diverse populations and established institutions of the former kingdom while ensuring effective Frankish control. The Merovingian approach to territorial integration had evolved through previous conquests to emphasize the preservation of existing administrative structures under new leadership rather than complete institutional replacement, recognizing that successful governance required maintaining economic productivity and social stability in newly acquired territories. Sometimes the most effective way to rule conquered people is to let them keep their own laws and customs. Just make sure they know who's really in charge. The preservation of Burgundian legal traditions within the Frankish administrative system demonstrated the practical value of the sophisticated legal codes that had been developed during the kingdom's independent existence. The Lex Burgundionum continued to govern legal relationships among former Burgundian subjects, while Frankish law applied to interactions involving Frankish settlers and officials, creating complex jurisdictional arrangements that required careful management to prevent conflicts. The survival of substantial portions of Burgundian legal documentation in later Frankish archives suggests that Merovingian administrators recognized the utility of existing legal frameworks and sought to incorporate them into their expanding governmental systems rather than simply replacing them with Frankish alternatives. The economic integration of former Burgundian territories proceeded through systematic efforts to maintain existing productive activities while redirecting their outputs to serve Frankish political and military needs. The sophisticated agricultural systems that had developed in Burgundian territories continued to operate under new ownership arrangements, with Frankish nobles and royal officials assuming control of major estates while preserving the technical expertise and labour forces that had made these properties productive. Archaeological evidence reveals continued operation of craft production facilities and commercial networks, suggesting that economic life adapted to new political circumstances without experiencing complete disruption. The cultural legacy of the Burgundian kingdom persisted despite political conquest through the preservation of distinctive artistic traditions, legal practices, and social customs that had developed during the century of independent existence. The synthesis of Germanic and Roman cultural elements that had characterized Burgundian society provided models for similar cultural integration processes occurring throughout the Frankish kingdom as it absorbed diverse populations and territories. Archaeological evidence reveals the continued production of distinctively Burgundian artistic styles and craft products well into the Frankish period, suggesting that cultural identity could survive political transformation when it served practical functions or met continuing social needs. The Burgundians had lost their kingdom, but they hadn't lost themselves. Transformation of Burgundian territories under Carolingian rule represented a fundamental shift from the administrative pragmatism of Merovingian governance to a more ambitious vision of cultural renewal and imperial restoration that would profoundly reshape regional identity throughout the 8th and 9th centuries. When Pepin the Short consolidated Frankish royal authority in 751 AD, the former Burgundian lands had already experienced 2 centuries of integration into Frankish political structures, creating hybrid governmental systems that combined Germanic administrative traditions with Roman provincial practices. The Carolingian revolution in governance extended far beyond mere dynastic change to encompass systematic efforts at cultural standardization, religious reform, and intellectual revival that would fundamentally alter the relationship between regional identities and imperial authority. The monastic reform movements that characterized Carolingian religious policy found particularly fertile ground in Burgundian territories, where established monastic communities possessed both the institutional infrastructure and intellectual traditions necessary for supporting ambitious programs of religious and cultural renewal. The Abbey of Saint-Maurice, which had been founded during the independent Burgundian kingdom, became a focal point for Carolingian monastic reform efforts, receiving substantial royal patronage and serving as a model for similar reforms throughout the region. Archaeological evidence from the abbey reveals extensive construction projects during the early Carolingian period, including the expansion of church buildings, the construction of new residential quarters for monks, and the creation of specialized facilities for manuscript production and scholarly activities. The Abbey of Cluny, founded in 910 AD through the patronage of Duke William the Pious of Aquitaine, emerged as the most influential center of monastic reform in Burgundian territories, developing innovative approaches to monastic organization that would influence religious communities throughout Europe. The Cluniac reforms emphasized strict adherence to the rule of St. Benedict, while creating centralized administrative structures that connected individual monasteries to broader networks of religious authority and mutual support. The scriptoria that developed at Cluniac monasteries throughout Burgundy became renowned throughout Europe for the quality and sophistication of their manuscript production, creating illuminated texts that combined traditional Burgundian artistic elements with Carolingian stylistic innovations. Monasteries had become the guardians of civilization itself. The development of Romanesque architectural styles throughout Burgundian territories during the 10th and 11th centuries represented one of the most significant cultural achievements of this period, creating distinctive building traditions that influenced church construction throughout Europe, while expressing specifically Burgundian approaches to combining spiritual symbolism with architectural innovation. The Romanesque churches constructed throughout the region demonstrate remarkable diversity in their specific design solutions, while maintaining common characteristics that reflect shared cultural values and technical traditions. Archaeological analysis of these buildings reveals sophisticated understanding of structural engineering principles that enabled the construction of larger interior spaces, more complex decorative programs, and more ambitious architectural compositions than had been possible with earlier building techniques. The Church of Sainte-Foy at Conques exemplifies the artistic sophistication achieved by Burgundian architects and craftsmen during the Romanesque period, with its elaborate sculptural program, complex architectural composition, and innovative approaches to integrating structural and decorative elements. The church's famous tympanum depicting the Last Judgment demonstrates remarkable artistic achievement, combining theological sophistication with visual drama in ways that could communicate complex religious concepts to both literate and illiterate audiences. Imagine a medieval comic book carved in stone, telling the ultimate story of salvation and damnation with such power that it could literally frighten people into heaven. The emergence of the Duchy of Burgundy as a distinct political entity within the Capetian realm represented a fundamental transformation in the governance of the former Burgundian territories, creating institutional frameworks that would shape regional development for centuries while establishing new relationships between royal authority and territorial autonomy. When Hugh Capet ascended to the French throne in 987 AD, the fragmented political landscape left by Carolingian decline required systematic reconstruction of administrative structures capable of managing diverse territories with complex histories and established traditions of local governance. The creation of the Duchy of Burgundy under Capetian authority proceeded through careful negotiation between royal prerogatives and regional autonomy, establishing precedents that would influence French territorial administration throughout the medieval period. The rise of the Valois Dukes of Burgundy, beginning with Philip the Bold's succession in 1363, transformed the duchy from a regional French territory into one of Europe's most powerful political entities, capable of challenging royal authority and pursuing independent diplomatic initiatives that reflected broader ambitions for territorial expansion and political influence. Philip's marriage to Margaret of Flanders in 1369 brought substantial Flemish territories under Burgundian control, creating a trans-regional state that combined the agricultural wealth of Burgundy with the commercial prosperity of the Low Countries. This territorial expansion required fundamental restructuring of administrative systems to accommodate diverse populations with different legal traditions, economic structures, and political expectations while maintaining unified governance under ducal authority. Philip the Good's accession in 1419 initiated the most successful period of Burgundian expansion and cultural development, as the new duke combined military capabilities inherited from his predecessors with diplomatic skills that enabled systematic territorial acquisition without provoking unified opposition from neighboring powers. Philip's approach to territorial expansion emphasized negotiation and legal acquisition over military conquest, recognizing that sustainable expansion required maintaining the loyalty and cooperation of acquired populations while avoiding conflicts that could drain ducal resources or provoke intervention by more powerful neighbors. Sometimes the pen really is mightier than the sword. The development of Burgundian court culture during Philip the Good's reign created one of Europe's most sophisticated centers of late medieval artistic and intellectual activity, attracting talented individuals from throughout the continent while establishing cultural standards that influenced aristocratic behavior and artistic production across multiple kingdoms. The ducal court that developed at Brussels combined traditional Burgundian cultural elements with innovations borrowed from French, Flemish, and Italian sources, creating distinctive approaches to courtly ceremony, artistic patronage, and intellectual discourse that expressed both ducal power and cultural sophistication. This was the Renaissance before the Renaissance, a flowering of art, music, literature, and learning that made Burgundy the envy of Europe. The establishment of the Order of the Golden Fleece in 1430 represented Philip the Good's most ambitious attempt to create institutional frameworks that could bind the Burgundian nobility to ducal authority while establishing the duchy's cultural and political prestige on a European scale. The order's elaborate ceremonial requirements, exclusive membership criteria, and complex symbolic systems created bonds of loyalty and mutual obligation among Burgundian nobles while demonstrating ducal authority through spectacular public ceremonies that impressed both subjects and foreign observers. Archaeological evidence from sites associated with Golden Fleece ceremonies reveals the substantial resources invested in these events, including specialized ceremonial equipment, elaborate architectural settings, and coordinated logistics that supported gatherings of nobles from throughout the Burgundian territories. The cultural patronage that characterized Philip the Good's court attracted some of Europe's most talented artists, musicians, and scholars, creating intellectual environments that fostered innovation while serving ducal political objectives through the production of works that celebrated Burgundian achievements and legitimized ducal authority. The illuminated manuscripts produced at the ducal court combined technical sophistication with artistic innovation, creating visual narratives that communicated complex political and cultural messages to both literate and illiterate audiences. But the très riche Heures du Duc de Berry and similar works demonstrate the remarkable artistic achievements possible when talented artists received generous patronage and access to the finest materials and technical resources. Charles the Bold's accession to ducal authority in 1467 marked the beginning of the final phase of Burgundian expansion, characterized by increasingly aggressive territorial acquisition and direct challenges to both French royal authority and Holy Roman imperial power. Charles's military campaigns against the Swiss Confederation, Alsatian cities, and French royal forces demonstrated both the military capabilities that Burgundian expansion had created and the fundamental limitations that would ultimately doom ducal ambitions for complete political independence. His siege of Nancy in 1477 and subsequent death in battle marked the end of Burgundian expansion while revealing the military and diplomatic challenges that had made continued expansion increasingly difficult to sustain. One man's ambition would bring down an empire, but from its ashes would rise something even greater. The death of Charles the Bold at Nancy in January 1477 precipitated a succession crisis that would fundamentally reshape European political geography while establishing the foundation for centuries of Habsburg dominance over the former Burgundian territories. Charles's only heir, his daughter Mary of Burgundy, inherited vast territories that stretched from the Alps to the North Sea. But her position as a female ruler in a political environment dominated by aggressive male competitors created immediate vulnerabilities that neighboring powers sought to exploit. The French crown under Louis XV moved swiftly to reclaim territories that had been lost to Burgundian expansion, while the Holy Roman Empire under Frederick III pursued diplomatic strategies designed to bring the Burgundian inheritance under Habsburg control through marriage alliance rather than military conquest. Mary's marriage to Maximilian of Habsburg in August 1477 represented a calculated political decision that would have profound consequences for European development over the following centuries. And the union brought the accumulated wealth and territorial holdings of the Burgundian state under Habsburg authority, while providing Mary with military and diplomatic resources necessary for defending her inheritance against French aggression. Archaeological evidence from the wedding celebrations at Ghent reveals the spectacular nature of these ceremonies, with elaborate tournaments, feasting halls, and ceremonial displays that demonstrated both the wealth of the Burgundian inheritance and the political significance of the Habsburg alliance. The integration of Burgundian territories into the expanding Habsburg dominions required sophisticated administrative arrangements that could accommodate the diverse legal traditions, commercial privileges, and cultural expectations that had developed during centuries of Burgundian rule. Maximilian's approach to territorial governance emphasized the preservation of established local institutions while establishing clear hierarchical relationships that subordinated regional authority to Habsburg imperial objectives. The administrative structures that emerged from this integration process combined traditional Burgundian governmental practices with Habsburg innovations in territorial management, creating hybrid systems that would influence European administrative development throughout the early modern period. The Burgundians had become part of something bigger, the vast Habsburg Empire that would dominate Europe for centuries. The economic implications of Habsburg inheritance extended far beyond simple territorial acquisition to encompass fundamental restructuring of European commercial networks and financial systems. The combination of Burgundian agricultural wealth, Flemish commercial expertise, and Habsburg territorial resources created economic capabilities that would enable the financing of global expansion projects and military campaigns on an unprecedented scale. The silver mines of the Tyrol combined with the commercial networks of Antwerp and Bruges provided financial foundations that would support Habsburg operations in Italy, the Americas, and throughout the Holy Roman Empire for centuries. Burgundian trade routes became the arteries of a global empire. The linguistic legacy of Burgundian settlement and cultural development manifested itself through the preservation and evolution of Franco-Provençal dialects that had emerged from the interaction between Germanic Burgundian speech patterns and the Latin-derived languages spoken by Gallo-Roman populations. These linguistic developments reflected centuries of cultural synthesis that had created distinctive regional speech patterns combining elements from multiple language families. Modern linguistic analysis reveals that Franco-Provençal dialects preserved certain Germanic phonological features and vocabulary items that disappeared from other Romance languages while simultaneously developing unique grammatical structures that reflected the specific cultural and social conditions of Burgundian territories. The development of Franco-Provençal as a distinct linguistic group proceeded through complex processes of language contact and cultural synthesis that occurred over several centuries of coexistence between Germanic and Romance-speaking populations. Archaeological evidence from settlement sites reveals patterns of cultural interaction that created conditions favorable for linguistic innovation and synthesis. Multilingual inscriptions found at religious sites demonstrate the practical use of multiple languages within the same communities, while the preservation of Germanic personal names within Romance linguistic contexts suggests sustained cultural contact rather than simple linguistic replacement. Languages don't just appear, they're forged through centuries of people living, working, and loving together across cultural boundaries. Archaeological discoveries throughout the former Burgundian territories have revolutionized modern understanding of early medieval material culture, settlement patterns, and social organization through the recovery of substantial artifact assemblages and the systematic investigation of settlement sites that reveal the complexity of Burgundian society. Excavations conducted since the mid-20th century have uncovered evidence of sophisticated craft production, extensive trade networks, and complex social hierarchies that challenge earlier assumptions about the nature of post-Roman Germanic societies. The material evidence reveals technological capabilities, artistic achievements, and economic relationships that demonstrate the advanced nature of Burgundian civilization during its period of independent development. Metalwork capabilities revealed through archaeological investigation demonstrate the sophisticated technical knowledge possessed by Burgundian craftsmen and the extensive trade networks that provided access to raw materials and finished products from throughout Europe and beyond. Archaeological analysis of Burgundian weapons reveals advanced metallurgical techniques, including pattern welding, differential hardening, and complex alloy compositions that created tools and weapons of exceptional quality and durability. The presence of specialized workshop areas at major settlement sites indicates the development of craft specialization and professional artisan classes that could support sustained production of high-quality metalwork for both local consumption and long-distance trade. Jewelry and decorative metalwork recovered from Burgundian archaeological contexts reveal artistic traditions that combine Germanic symbolic systems with influences absorbed from contact with Roman, Byzantine, and other cultural traditions. The technical sophistication of these productions indicates the presence of highly skilled craftsmen capable of working with precious metals and employing complex decoration techniques, including filigree, granulation, and cloisonné enamel work. The stylistic development evident in archaeological sequences reveals the evolution of distinctively Burgundian artistic traditions that maintained recognizable characteristics while adapting to changing cultural influences and technical innovations. Every artifact tells a story of craftsmen perfecting their skills over lifetimes, of traders carrying goods across continents, of warriors displaying their wealth and status through magnificent weapons and jewelry. The influence of Burgundian legal traditions on European jurisprudence extended far beyond the immediate territories of the former kingdom to affect the development of legal systems throughout medieval and early modern Europe. The sophisticated legal codes developed during the independent kingdom's existence provided models for legal synthesis that influenced the development of customary law throughout France and other European territories. The Burgundian emphasis on written legal codes, procedural regularity, and the integration of different legal traditions created precedents that would influence European legal development for centuries. Concepts of property rights, criminal justice, and contractual obligation that we take for granted today have Burgundian fingerprints all over them. The concept of feudal obligation and territorial authority that developed within Burgundian political structures contributed significantly to the evolution of European feudalism and the relationship between royal authority and territorial autonomy. The Burgundian approach to governing diverse populations through flexible institutional arrangements that preserved local traditions while maintaining unified political authority provided models that would influence European political development throughout the medieval period. The balance between central authority and regional autonomy that characterized Burgundian governance created precedents for constitutional development that would affect European political evolution into the modern period. The preservation of Burgundian cultural identity within broader European political frameworks demonstrates the resilience of regional traditions and the capacity for cultural synthesis that enabled the survival of distinctive local characteristics despite political transformation and integration into larger political entities. Modern Burgundy retains cultural traditions, architectural styles, and social practices that can be traced to the medieval period of independent development, while contemporary regional identity continues to reflect the historical experiences that shaped local communities during centuries of political evolution. Walk through Burgundy today, and you're walking through living history. Every church, every vineyard, every village square echoes with voices speaking across 15 centuries. The wine-producing traditions that developed in Burgundian territories during the medieval period established the foundation for one of Europe's most prestigious viticultural regions, with cultivation techniques, varietal selection, and quality standards that continue to influence global wine production. Archaeological evidence reveals the systematic development of vineyard cultivation during the medieval period, with monastic communities playing crucial roles in developing the technical expertise and quality standards that would establish Burgundy's international reputation. The preservation of traditional cultivation methods and the continuation of family-based production systems demonstrate the persistence of cultural practices that connect modern Burgundy to its medieval origins. When you drink a glass of Burgundian wine, you're tasting 15 centuries of accumulated knowledge and tradition. The architectural heritage that survives throughout the former Burgundian territories provides tangible evidence of the cultural achievements and artistic sophistication that characterized the region during its periods of independent development. Romanesque churches, ducal palaces, and monastic complexes demonstrate the architectural innovations and artistic achievements that emerged from the synthesis of different cultural traditions within Burgundian political frameworks. The preservation of these architectural monuments and their continued use for religious, cultural, and civic purposes demonstrates the enduring relevance of Burgundian cultural traditions within modern European society. The historical impact of Burgundian civilization extends far beyond the immediate chronological and geographic boundaries of the kingdoms and duchies that bore the Burgundian name to encompass fundamental contributions to European political, legal, cultural, and economic development that continue to influence modern society. But the synthesis of Germanic and Roman traditions that characterized Burgundian development provided models for cultural integration and political organization that would shape European civilization throughout the medieval period and beyond. From their origins along the Vistula River to their final integration into the Habsburg dominions, the Burgundians participated in and shaped the fundamental transformations that created medieval and early modern Europe, leaving cultural, legal, and political legacies that continue to influence contemporary society. If you enjoyed this journey through one of Europe's most fascinating yet underappreciated civilizations, subscribe to Flow of History for more deep dives into the empires that shaped our world.